Tears were inevitable. When Diana was mentioned, the moment that hit mid-sentence struck like lightning through the courtroom. 11 words, sharp, cold, precise, carved through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel, leaving the air trembling. Until that instant, the trial had moved with the mechanical rhythm of ritual, the shuffle of papers, the clipped tones of the judge, the scribbles of reporters dutifully recording each word. When Judge Margaret Thornbury uttered that line and paused, it wasn't for effect. It was as though she allowed its sting to linger, settling in the space between her voice and the walls. The atmosphere shifted. You could almost feel the air being sucked from the room. In the witness box, Prince Harry, so stoic all morning, froze and then shattered. He had sat upright, shoulders squared, chin set, a soldier enduring the endless strain of a public life. But those words, his wife's own words, read by the sterile authority of the courtroom, cracked his carefully constructed armor. His jaw twitched, his hands curled into fists on his knees, knuckles bone white. That meticulously composed public face, always so controlled, twisted into raw, primal pain, betrayal, disbelief, anguish, and then the moment that would etch itself permanently in the memory of everyone present. Harry lowered his head like a man trying to dodge an invisible sniper's bullet, burying his face in his hands. A guttural sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped him. Not performative, not staged, raw, broken, devastatingly human. The kind of sound that tells you someone has discovered a truth far crueler than any lie they ever feared. The courtroom didn't just quiet, it froze completely. Even the sketch artist's pencil hung suspended, hovering mid-air. The case had begun as a battle over privacy, a tabloid overstepping, a prince demanding accountability after years of relentless intrusion. But now, this moment was about something else entirely, something far more personal, the collapse of a love story, live, unedited, before the eyes of the world. Because these messages, never meant for public scrutiny, were now laid bare. Certainly not by a judge, certainly not in front of Harry. These were digital snippets, correspondence between Meghan and a friend she had trusted since her early acting days in California, a confidant, and yet, this confidant had quietly cooperated with the defense. Within the betrayal, another betrayal lived. Judge Thornbury had cautioned the gallery earlier that morning. The messages were graphic, not visually, but in implication. They painted a picture of not just a different narrative, but a different woman, not the vulnerable, embattled duchess driven out by media and monarchy, but a strategist, a tactician, a brand manager orchestrating a personal rebrand under the most intense public microscope of the decade. Her delivery was calm, almost clinical, but the words carried their own crushing weight. Make sure he tears up. Diana, ever present in memory, hung in the air like a spectre. Harry realized the grief he had thought was authentic, raw, and unguarded had been manipulated, prepped, scripted, staged. Not for healing, but for headlines. His most sacred sorrow, the grief that had defined him since boyhood, had been transformed into a media beat, a calculated tactic. The courtroom's attention shifted entirely to him. His tears were quiet, almost imperceptible, yet they spoke volumes. His shoulders rose and fell like waves crashing against a shore of disbelief. Every quiver, every sniffle, every subtle tremble broadcast the truth more powerfully than any speech could. At that moment, Harry wasn't a prince. He was simply a man, exposed, unraveling in real time. Security instinctively shifted closer. His attorney requested a recess, citing emotional distress. Judge Thornbury refused. Court must continue. Rules and protocol melted in the heat of the moment. Phones, meant to remain off, buzzed. Thumbs flew across screens, sending updates, alerts, and viral clips racing into the digital ether. Outside, protesters, royal supporters, and news crews gathered, alerted by breaking clips. What had started as a slow-moving legal case had exploded into uncontrollable chaos. Harry remained silent, statuesque in grief. It wasn't only the public manipulation that hurt, it was the private manipulation. The possibility that Meghan had engineered his reactions, his story, even his mother's memory, tore through him. If that had been staged, then what, if anything, was real? In that void of trust, everything began to unravel. Not just the legal case, but a marriage, a movement, a myth. Time no longer passed in minutes. It passed in tremors, moments stretched into painful intervals between gasps, between the heartbreaking silence of a man built to endure everything except this. What followed was no longer a courtroom proceeding. It was a televised emotional collapse, slow motion, raw, devastatingly human. For 4 hours, Harry did not speak. He sat, face flushed, eyes swollen, hands trembling, as the defense continued their relentless presentation. Each page, each time-stamped message landed like a hammer blow. Some messages subtle, some devastating, but all compounded, layer upon layer, constructing a portrait of betrayal. One text referred to a private family dinner as a gold mine of reactive content. Another instructed on how to mold his grief for maximum public effect. He wears grief like silk. We just need the right lighting. The courtroom was paralyzed. Even the scratch of pens on paper felt intrusive. Veteran reporters, hardened by decades covering war crimes and corruption, sat slack-jawed. Nobody had anticipated the depth, the precision, the sheer magnitude of the manipulation. This was no longer about a reputation being dismantled. This was the destruction of a worldview, unfolding in real time. Phase 2 of the defense. Narrative construction and manipulation. Messages dissected Harry's therapy disclosures during the Oprah interview, annotated with meticulous direction. Pause here. Insert breath. My brother stopped taking my calls. Every note chipped away at his sense of self. Harry's body betrayed him, stiffened, then slouched, then sagged entirely. He rubbed his face until red streaks appeared across his cheeks. His lawyer whispered urgently, but Harry didn't respond. He seemed to be retreating inside himself, as if trying to escape his own skin. The air grew thick, heavy with silence, tension, and disbelief. Then, the most damning message arrived. He still wants their approval. It's pathetic, but I can use it. The guilt over his mother makes him easy to redirect. That's the engine we're on. Even the legal teams froze. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ," and swallowed it. Harry flinched. He didn't sob. Eyes closed, then opened, hollow, deadened, as if a flame inside had been snuffed out. Security exchanged glances. They were ready but did not intervene. The judge asked if Harry required a recess. He didn't answer. He simply nodded. Not defiance, not defeat. Emptiness, the nod of a man stripped of agency, manipulated by timing, evidence, and someone he once trusted more than life itself. 30 minutes later, he returned, physically present, emotionally absent, eyes rimmed red, gait slow, suit hanging like borrowed fabric, tissue marks visible on sleeves, offered a notepad. He didn't touch it. Court continued. Phase 3, monetizing royal pain. Childhood traumas dissected for podcasts and books. Messages debated whether certain memories should be released now or saved for later. Don't waste it all. Harry's layers haven't been fully explored. Clip of him with the Queen's corgis. Nostalgia is pure engagement. By now, Harry's reactions were almost absent. Limbs limp, eyes fixed, breathing shallow. Only faint jaw twitches, and the rise and fall of his chest suggested consciousness. The judge paused, asked if another break was needed. Lawyer answered, yes, he's not well. Still, Harry didn't move. Security flanked him, guiding him as if he were a concussion patient being led down a hallway. Outside, the public's reaction was immediate. Royal supporters sobbed openly. Critics were speechless. Even longtime skeptics felt the tectonic shift in perception. The courtroom had become a crucible. Every message, every annotation, every revelation compounded into a spectacle of grief, betrayal, and shock. Through it all, the lesson remained painfully clear. Make him tear up. And in that knowledge, the world saw what few ever witness. Prince Harry, not as royalty, but as a human being, exposed, raw, and unforgettable. Royal supporters sobbed. Critics remained speechless. Even longtime skeptics of the monarchy felt something shift. The moment had shifted. This was no longer about sides, allegiances, or media narratives. This was about the truth, a truth that cut sharper than any blade, and about the exact instant a man realized he had not just lost his privacy, but that his entire reality had been quietly dismantled beneath him. Prince Harry didn't return to the courtroom for the rest of that day. When proceedings adjourned, his chair sat vacant, facing the bench like a silent witness to the devastation that had unfolded. It was a small, symbolic gesture, but damning in its clarity. The absence spoke louder than any statement he could have made. By that point, the courtroom drama had transcended the usual legal formalities, the press frenzy, even the intricate web of royal politics. This was no longer about who was right or wrong. It was about the private unravelling of a life lived under scrutiny, a life that had been shaped, moulded, and manipulated in ways he had only just begun to see. The story had evolved. It was no longer a matter of lawsuits, media infringement, or institutionally staged interviews. It was something infinitely more intimate, more shattering. The heartbreak of a man in love realising that perhaps he had been the only one invested in that love. That night, the corridors outside the courtroom hummed with whispers, speculation, and muted shock. By the next morning, the atmosphere inside the chamber had changed completely. Shock had hardened into grim anticipation. There was no hope for redemption, no expectation that anyone would clarify, explain, or mitigate the chaos. The world wanted closure, and the press demanded revelation. The public craved it. Every journalist, every observer, every silent viewer wanted to know what else had been said. Which additional truths had been hidden beneath layers of curated compassion and performative vulnerability? What had been orchestrated as authenticity was now laid bare as something far more calculated, far more deliberate. What followed was executed with meticulous precision, organised by the defence into 3 devastatingly potent categories. Each evidentiary folder, clearly labelled and strategically presented for the cameras, carried a lethal simplicity. Category 1, monetization. Category 2, family manipulation. Category 3, emotional exploitation. Even the titles themselves, sterile on the surface, hinted at a careful, almost surgical intent to dismantle not just a person's public image, but their inner world. The first folder, monetization, revealed the coldly pragmatic engine behind what had been publicly framed as organic emotion. The defense laid out a series of private messages between Meghan and her California-based confidant, spanning from late 2022 through the summer of 2024. These exchanges were not scandalous in tone, but methodical in structure. Each message read less like casual communication and more like a blueprint, part branding strategy, part emotional calculation, part psychological architecture. It became clear that public vulnerability, grief, and nostalgia had been converted into currency, carefully traded for maximum impact. One particularly damning note outlined revenue streams tied to specific emotional arcs. Diana's legacy, labelled Halo, was associated with unresolved tension surrounding William. Catherine was categorised as a comparison vector. Charles, the king, was framed as a redemption thread. Us, representing Harry and Meghan, was coded as survivors reclaiming identity. Another message highlighted their Netflix contract as a personal pension vehicle, a financial framework built atop heartbreak and human vulnerability. Meghan had mapped a royal trauma arc to stretch across at least 3 projects, using the term trauma fatigue pacing to dictate when disclosures should hit the public for maximum emotional resonance. The folder didn't stop at content. It extended into merchandising. A children's brand inspired by royal resilience was proposed, including plush toys called Archie Bears and a motivational picture book tied to Lily Bitt's name. Another message floated the idea of monetizing her daughter's birthday, a media event dressed as charity and celebration, carefully calibrated to overshadow the Windsor press cycle. Perhaps the most chilling note, labelled Crisis Capital, detailed how to convert negative press into engagement opportunities by framing attacks as bullying or colonial backlash. One line, bolded and underlined, read, "We don't run from scandals, we alchemize them." The first category exposed the transactional core of a public brand once perceived as authentic. The second detonated its moral foundation. These messages revealed not personal reflections, but calculated manipulations of the royal family itself. William was referred to as the real threat, dangerous not for passion, but for his polished control. Catherine was dubbed the uncrackable mask, her unyielding composure a source of frustration. Meghan's texts dissected Catherine's mental health, marriage, and parenting style with such precise cruelty that reporters struggled to quote them directly. One line chilled the courtroom. "If she cracks in public even once, it shifts the entire narrative. She's colder than marble." King Charles was analysed with similar precision. "Sentimental, weak in the right light," Meghan wrote, noting that his guilt over Diana could be leveraged for reconciliation if needed. Archival footage of Elizabeth II with a young Harry, she proposed, could be repurposed to frame their exit as a continuation of legacy, duty before ego, but updated for modern narrative. The emotional leverage extended to Harry's own children, Archie and Lilibet. "We'll decide later how Windsor we want them to appear. Titles matter, but not as much as optics," she wrote. The messages revealed not action, but intent, a strategic shaping of narrative, relationships, and emotional perception. The third category, emotional exploitation, cut deepest. These messages were exclusively about Harry, his fears, his traumas, the inner world he had long believed sacred. Meghan catalogued therapy sessions, night terrors, fears of helicopters, the uniform scandal, and Afghanistan interviews like case files. One message from spring 2023 read, "He said he misses his brother. I told him that's just memory, not reality. Nostalgia lies. Redirect fast." This was not casual advice. It was control, a precise emotional steering, a shaping of a human being's connections and responses. Harry sat motionless as each note was read aloud. No cries, no protests, only the hollow stare of someone realizing his life, his feelings, his very love had been repurposed as content. Drafts tweaked his vocabulary. Sad replaced with traumatized, confused with silenced. The final line, read slowly by the judge, delivered a blow no human could deflect. Harry's love for them is a vulnerability. If we don't manage it, it will derail everything. Not his love for me, not our love for each other, his love for them, his family, his past, his identity. The courtroom was still. Not a pen moved, not a journalist breathed. Grief seemed to have walked in and claimed its seat. By the end of the third folder, reality itself had been laid bare. Harry was not a prince, not a husband, not a public figure. He was a tool, a pivot, a mechanism for perception and manipulation. The fallout, inevitable and enormous, would touch personal, institutional, and global spheres. The moment the courtroom adjourned, whispers began to leak, carefully worded statements were released, and the walls of royal silence began to crack. Official responses were restrained. Buckingham Palace released nothing, but Clarence House issued a statement. "This is a difficult time for all families. Some matters are best resolved privately and with compassion." Yet the subtext screamed volumes. It was King Charles who had intervened, signalling that the father, not bureaucracy, had taken control. Insiders reported he was calm but drained, having read every word himself, absorbing every implication. "This is not vengeance," he reportedly said. "This is gravity. Discipline, no gloating, no leaks. This is not a victory, it is a collapse." For Charles, the pain was not the damage to the crown, it was the portrayal of his son as a pawn, as a walking project, a human strategy fueled by trauma. William's reaction was no less intense. Long constrained by protocol and duty, he now seethed in private. Meghan's messages had confirmed his worst suspicions. Harry had been pulled away, not only physically, but emotionally, repurposed as a mechanism to control perception. William's fury was precise, targeted, focused entirely on the fact that Harry had been allowed to be used in this way. When William read the line labelling Catherine the uncrackable mask, he fell silent, reportedly whispering, "She's trying to break her." It was a quiet, lethal acknowledgement of the stakes. He was not merely angry. No, anger alone does not capture the storm inside him. He was protective. The intensity in his gaze, the tautness of his jaw, the subtle quiver in his knuckles all spoke to a fierce, almost primal urge to shield what he loved most. The woman beside him, the mother of his children, had been treated not as family, not as kin, not even as a human being deserving of empathy, but as an obstacle, a public relations problem to be dismantled, to break her, to manipulate, to weaponize her presence against him, against the family, against the institution. Every word, every whispered plan, every message left a residue of calculated malice. The next morning, at a carefully scheduled public event in Cornwall, William stepped into view alongside Catherine. The occasion was a mental health initiative, ostensibly neutral, yet it had become a stage for controlled yet unspoken confrontation. William's speech was measured, calm and composed, but anyone observing closely, especially through the unforgiving lens of media cameras, would see the tremor of restrained fury in his hands. His knuckles gripped the podium as though it were the last anchor holding him to composure. Catherine, standing beside him, smiled politely, but her posture betrayed her. Tight shoulders, a barely perceptible stiffening of her spine, tension circling the eyes that had long borne both scrutiny and comparison. They did not speak Harry's name. They didn't need to. The unspoken weight of events hung heavy in the air. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had endured scrutiny for decades, always measured against her predecessor, always compared to Diana, painted as too perfect, too composed, too reserved. But what Meghan's messages revealed was something far darker than simple comparison or social commentary. It was intentional erosion. The attacks against Catherine weren't idle gossip. They were strategic, focused, cruelly precise, aimed at her motherhood, her marriage, even her mental health. One message hinted at the leak of a whisper about her postpartum struggles. Another labelled her insufferably blank, a phrase crafted to unsettle, to destabilise, to cast doubt on her humanity. Yet Catherine remained silent. That silence, far from weakness, was her shield. Observers described her reaction as internalised, but not unshaken, as though she absorbed the blows and stored them for fuel rather than retaliation. She felt them deeply, took them personally, yet refused to let them define her public image. After nearly 20 years of whispers, jabs, and microaggressions, she had learned that power often lay not in words, but in presence. Her response was not to fight back verbally, not to sensationalize, but to carry on with deliberate, calm dignity. And as the cameras captured her composure, it became clear. Her silence, her grace, her unflinching poise was more potent than any verbal defense she could have offered. The public reaction was immediate, seismic, and ferocious. Polls released within 48 hours of the courtroom readings revealed a dramatic shift in perception. Sympathy for Harry plummeted to its lowest point since his departure from royal life. Meghan's approval ratings fell even further, some surveys placing her in single-digit territory. The shift wasn't confined to the UK. Across the Atlantic, where the couple had found a more receptive audience, the tide began to turn. Morning shows that had once praised their courage now questioned their authenticity. Editorials called out betrayal, not just of familial bonds, but of trust itself. Influencers hastily deleted old posts, corporate sponsors paused campaigns, and a Netflix executive quoted anonymously remarked, "We bought a memoir, not a manipulation manual." The ripple effect extended even into diplomatic channels. British diplomats quietly flagged concerns to their American counterparts, noting potential long-term impacts on royal soft power. An off-the-record remark from a European ambassador summed it up succinctly. The strength of the crown has always been mystery. That is gone. It is gone on social media. The fallout was both rapid and unpredictable. Public opinion polarized sharply. One camp declared the messages proof of Meghan's orchestration, labeling her a master manipulator who had turned a grieving prince into a product. The opposing camp condemned the release of private correspondence, emphasizing privacy violations and condemning the courtroom exposure of intimate details. But even her staunch defenders could not ignore the subtle shift. The blind allegiance that had once colored public discourse had faltered, replaced by uneasy questions. How much of what we believed had been genuine? The legal case, ostensibly a privacy lawsuit, had become a vehicle revealing more than any tabloid scandal could. What remained was wreckage, a monarchy shaken but resolute, a marriage cracked, perhaps beyond repair. Harry, Once the emblem of modern royal rebellion, now adrift in his own life, Meghan, once heralded as the bold voice of change, was now viewed by many as the architect of one of the most sophisticated media illusions in recent memory. No one could predict what would come next, but the world collectively understood the fallout was only beginning. Every leaked message, every phrase, every chilling fragment of private correspondence was scrutinized. One haunting question cut through every analysis, every headline, every social media debate. Was this calculated, cold self-preservation, or something else entirely? Had Meghan Markle constructed an emotional empire with deliberate precision, or was she navigating the most hostile institution in modern times with the only tools she believed would ensure survival? To understand the messages, one must peel back the layers of context: ambition, fear, perception, and the merciless machinery of control. Meghan cannot be reduced to a caricature of villainy. She was, after all, a former actress, a woman of colour, a mother, a wife, stepping into the eye of one of the most powerful symbolic machines in the world. The British monarchy, cameras rolling, knives drawn, centuries of protocol at her back, almost no human warmth. Perhaps these messages, when read through a different lens, were defensive strategies rather than acts of malice. Early in her royal life, Meghan endured relentless press scrutiny, racially charged headlines, fabricated family scandals, and systemic exclusion. She was left to navigate a cold, tradition-bound institution with almost no support. Perhaps the messages were armor, a way to protect herself, her husband, and her children from a system designed to consume and expel. "How do I protect myself?" she might have asked. "How do I safeguard my family in a machine that doesn't see me as one of its own?" Perhaps the infamous "make him tear up when discussing Diana" line wasn't deception at all, but preparation, armor, a preemptive strike against weaponization of grief. Understanding Meghan's mindset requires considering a fundamental clash: Hollywood versus Buckingham. In Hollywood, image is survival, narrative control is currency, emotion is a tool, timing is everything, and visibility is power. A well-timed emotional beat is not manipulation, it is craft. Branding trauma may feel practical rather than exploitative. When she planned Lilibet's birthday to coincide with royal events, when she analysed Harry's emotional disclosures, she may have believed she was amplifying his truth rather than commodifying his pain. In a household where stoicism was expected and vulnerability punished, perhaps she was simply giving him language, tools, and narrative support that he had never received from his own family. But not every act can be defended as cultural friction. Some messages were undeniably chilling. "He said he misses his brother. I told him that's just memory, not reality. Redirect fast." He was drifting. Here, strategy becomes control. Here, intimate love borders behavioural dominance. Meghan's writings revealed awareness of power, leverage, and how to package personal pain for public consumption. The contradiction is stark. Publicly, she spoke of silencing and oppression. Privately, she was never silent. She was directing, shaping, coaching. She was not voiceless. She was in command. Ultimately, the deepest tension lies in intent. Did Meghan manipulate Harry's memories, relationships, and trauma for personal gain? Or did she genuinely believe she was protecting him, offering tools and guidance he had never received? The line between mentorship and manipulation is razor-thin, particularly when one partner carries long-standing trauma and the other is highly articulate, ambitious, and conditioned to navigate hostile environments. What the messages reveal, above all, is power. Power. Harry willingly gave her power. She may have believed she needed to wield it for both their sakes, but in doing so, she rewrote his truth, and when that truth came crashing down in a courtroom, the man who had once believed he was free realized he had merely been recast. So, was Meghan a strategist or a survivor? The answer may be both. She was calculating, but she was also cornered, loving, yet leading. She sought freedom, but built an empire on chains made of stories that may never be told the same way again. Whatever her motive, the damage was done. Now the world must decide, not just whether to believe her, but whether to forgive her and Harry. He must decide whether love without truth is still love at all. By the time the courtroom cleared and the public reaction reached a deafening roar, Only one question remained, spoken in headlines, whispered in royal corridors, pondered in private living rooms around the world. Can Harry come back? Can a man who burned the bridge, then watched it collapse behind him, turn around and walk home? Not as a prince, not as a rebel, but as a son, a brother, a man stripped of illusions. The answer is complicated, not just by logistics or titles, but by wounds, some self-inflicted, some carved by others, all still open. Harry left Britain in search of peace, in search of safety, in search of agency. But what he found in California, fame, fortune, visibility, came at the price of his past. And now the world sees that the cost may have been even higher. The man who once stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, shoulder to shoulder with his family, now stands alone in a fractured reality. No longer the cheeky soldier prince, no longer the dignified duke, perhaps no longer a husband in the full sense of the word. The revelations from the courtroom didn't just expose strategy, they shattered the foundation of Harry's new identity, the one built on authenticity, vulnerability, and shared victimhood. He now knows that his most sacred memories were mined, therapy sessions repurposed, grief directed, doubts managed like liabilities. And yet, part of him still loves her. Sources say that is what torments him most. Quiet discussions within the royal household have already begun, not about restoring titles, but about restoring ties. King Charles, despite the enormity of the betrayal, remains a father. He reportedly communicated through intermediaries that Harry would be welcomed back to the UK, privately, quietly, without cameras, not as a working royal, but as a son in need. A father has no rules, Charles reportedly remarked. Princess Anne and Prince Edward have voiced cautious but real support. Even Catherine, though hurt, is said to believe the children deserve a connection to their roots. Only William remains silent. His wounds are different, sharper, deeper. The betrayal of trust between brothers isn't constitutional, it's personal. And personal wounds take the longest to heal. Should Harry seek custody of Archie and Lilibet? If the marriage continues to crumble, the legal battle would be unprecedented. A British royal engaged in a custody dispute on American soil, with dual citizenship, royal titles, security protocols, and visitation rights stretching across oceans. Some insiders fear Meghan could leverage the children as legal anchors to prevent Harry's permanent return to the UK. Others say such a move would be politically suicidal. Harry's team is preparing quietly, discreetly. Financial arrangements are under review. Property holdings in the United States are being audited. He's not running, but he's packing. Public sentiment has begun to shift, not entirely away from Harry, but toward pity. Not admiration, not alliance, but sorrow. Millions watched the courtroom footage. Millions saw the shaking hands, the blotchy face, the silence of a man undone, emotional captivity masquerading as love. Mental health experts have weighed in, noting signs of gaslighting, codependency, and trauma manipulation. Suddenly, a new narrative emerges. Not Harry the betrayer, but Harry the betrayed. And that framing changes everything. It doesn't absolve him, but it explains him. Perhaps, just perhaps, it opens the door for him to come home. Not to royal duties, but to himself. After everything, the tears, the transcripts, the trauma, it is truth that Harry may now crave most of all. Because in the end, no matter how far a prince travels, no matter how many crowns he walks away from, he is still a son, he is still a brother, and perhaps someday soon he might finally come home. If you've followed this journey with us and felt the weight of every revelation, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. There's so much more unfolding in this story, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter breaks.